Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to some more Warhammer 40k lore. And today, we're going to be talking about the gribbly little Tyranids, because it's been a while since I talked about them. And, more specifically, we're going to be talking about the Lictor. In other words, this is going to be one of those relatively short videos where I go over a small but very important part of 40k lore, since the Lictor is quite key to the whole Tyranid expansion thingity-bob and, actually finding more food for them to nom. Tyranid Lictors are essentially extremely advanced pathfinders for the Tyranid Hive fleets. They get scattered out in giant shotgun patterns in front of the fleet, and they are given a very rudimentary homing system, biological obviously, to try and find planets that might sustain life. Now, this is a very, very dodgy system, and, best part of all, they have little, if any, warp capabilities. They're essentially just giant spore pods with a single lictor in it that are fired out into the vastness of empty space and hoping to God, or whatever gribbly Tyranid version of God might exist, that they'll actually find a planet to land on. As you can probably imagine, a fair few lictors never make it anywhere and just spend the rest of eternity floating quietly through space until they find a star to crash themselves into. Though, bear in mind, they're not completely unguided, it isn't complete willy-nilly. The pod itself, the spore pod, does have access to some rudimentary quote-unquote technology, biotech, to try and figure out where there might be planets, and which ones might have life. It certainly isn't the most reliable of systems, but it's better than nothing, and it also has the capabilities to direct itself in the roughly general, kind-of-ish direction of said possible planet filled with life. They're also clearly capable of atmospheric entry, and considering the size of one of these pods, it would be very, very difficult for any kind of planetary organ network to pick up on it. Not impossible, and if they know what they're looking for, they could probably figure out if they'd been hit by something that could be a spore pod and act accordingly, but for a low-tech civilization, or hell, an imperial civilization that doesn't know that this thing is on the way, the odds of it getting spotted are pretty damn small. And when the wonderful little gribbly actually makes it down to the planet, the odds of it getting found out are even less. In fact, they decrease fucking dramatically, since the Lictor is one of very, very few Tyranids that don't operate purely on an aggression instinct. Instead, its foremost goal in life is to be as hard to detect as literally possible. It wishes to blend in with the local population, and it does this via a fairly rudimental low-key intelligence. Although considerably more intelligence than your average Tyranid, since the vast majority of Tyranid bioorganisms are essentially simple biological computers. They are given a set of directives, for example, follow the instructions of your closest commander, Hive node, for example a Hive tyrant, and murder everything within the immediate area. So all of the instructions this thing, a basic god for example, might actually need is where to move, how to get there, and how to kill everything once it gets there. A Lictor, on the other hand, has to take into consideration a hell of a lot more in the way of parameters, because its two primary goals contradict one another. One, the Lictor wishes to remain undetected for as long as possible, partially because if it is detected, it's going to be murdered, or, well, that's not entirely certain, because Lictors are pretty damn good at hiding and killing, but at the very least, the locals will undoubtedly make a fairly coordinated effort to mount its head upon the nearest wall. And, secondly, having a Lictor nearby is a pretty goddamn clear indication that they might expect more Tyranids to show up in the immediate future, and so the local governor, or whatever Xeno species that lives on the planet, will be able to take the necessary precautions. Basically, they'll be able to yell, "Help!" really loudly in the hope that somebody will show up to help them. However, the Lictor can't just stay undetected, because its other task is to try and make sure that the planet is actually worth invading, and to do that, the Lictor literally has to wander around the planet and try and figure out roughly how many humans, or whatever else there might be on the planet, that there actually is on the planet. And since the Lictor can't, hack the internet or watch television shows to get a rough pointer, he has to do it the good old-fashioned way. He literally has to trudge around the planet and get a general sense of how many people there might be there. As you can probably imagine, this is an extraordinarily imprecise way of gathering information on population numbers. The poor Lictor could be stuck in a fucking jungle for literally years encountering virtually nothing other than, local creatures, and just become a local boogeyman from the scattered population. Or it could dump his happy little ass in the middle of a goddamn hive city and immediately go, ho, 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 ho. So many fleshy things to consume. I'd best call Mother real quick. Ideally, of course, it would land somewhere in between of those extremes, not getting stuck in the jungle for God only knows how many months, if not years, and preferably also not in the middle of a hive city. Lictors are pretty goddamn good at hiding, but, well, there are limits, and whilst murders are not uncommon in a hive city, murders where the victim has been chopped into tiny little pieces and then wrung through a Lictor's digestive system, well, they're relatively rare. Though there are exceptions. Some Lictors have been considerably more blessed in the brains department than others, and can stay very, very stealthy for extended periods of time. When I say stealthy, I mean Alpha Legion level of fucking stealthy. I speak, of course, of one particular instance with a particular little Lictor known as the Deathleaper. It had a lot of fun on the missionary world of St. Caspelan. You see, this was a special little Lictor, because it was smart. Much smart. It figured out that instead of simply killing the religious leader of the world, therefore turning him into a martyr, it would instead fuck with him relentlessly over the course of something like a month. It would break into his bunker, kill all of his little friends, then look at him real grisly like and then run away. Some might even say that that is even creepier than finding a fully nude man holding a jar of mayonnaise in your closet. And it continued on for 10 full days. Every day, the Cardinal would surround himself with even more security. But no matter how many guards, no matter how many security cameras and fancy doodads he surrounded himself, every single night he would find the Deathleaper sitting quietly at the end of his bed, purring softly. Usually whilst covered in the blood and viscera of his ex-bodyguards. Personally, I think that the Deathleaper just wanted to be friends, and in reality, this should have been a beautiful story about interspecies love, but instead the Cardinal had to go and take it all the wrong way and go completely batshit insane over it. Oh, and speaking of Deathleaper-chan, and no, the mental image of the Deathleaper sitting at the end of your bed with massive anime eyes going "Ugu" will never leave your mind. Despite the fact that it's gotten retconned rather badly. You see, the Deathleaper was a single thing, but then back in 4th edition during the Fall of the Medusa campaign, they figured, that's not that scary, let's make an entire strain of them. So apparently, some local Tyranid Hive fleet was like, aha! We figured out how to make really fucking smart Lictors. And they sent them in the campaign and they got butchered by Imperials. In fact, they got cucked so hard that the Imperial Guard of all fucking forces not only managed to acquire a sample, but they managed to capture one alive. Wow, that is fucking embarrassing. And so the Tyranid Hive fleet at large was unable to recover the specific gene sample used in the special Deathleaper Lictors, meaning that they were lost to them forever. Well, partially. Games Workshop can never really give us a complete storyline because here's the thing. Whenever Games Workshop used to do a campaign, they'd be like, oh god, no, this is horrible, oh, death of the world, big chaos, oh, it'll be horrible, the world is at risk, there's a chaos invasion, la la la. Now you need to log on to our webpage and send in your battle results, and then 10,000 13-year-olds, just like myself at the time, plopped their plump little butts in front of a computer screen and sent in thousands of fraudulent battle reports. Which meant that every single one of these campaigns ended in a landslide Imperial victory. Which is precisely how the Imperial Guard not only managed to get one in the bag, but even capture one a goddamn live. And capturing a Lictor alive is, interesting enough in the first place, and a Deathleaper, well, that's just downright embarrassing for the Deathleaper. But the thing is, Games Workshop can never just go like, oh, well, clearly the majority of our audience wants us to do this. Instead, they have to go like, oh, but that isn't the scenario we wrote. And so the Deathleaper somehow managed to escape, steal itself a goddamn ship, kill the crew, waited for the rescue boat to show up, killed the rescue crew, stole the rescue ship, and apparently somehow fucking managed to figure out how to pilot the rescue ship to presumed safety. Okay, I get it. The Deathleaper is supposed to be really, really smart and shit, but come on. How would it even operate the fucking controls? I can only assume that this massive monstrosity would be sitting squeezed into a tiny cockpit, using its mouth mandibles to operate the controls, while sitting there just pulling random levers, hoping to God it doesn't ram itself into the nearest sun. But oh well, I am sure it all worked out for the better. Although, come to think of it, I can't remember any mention of the Deathleaper after that, so, well, not perhaps necessarily a happy ending, but certainly a warm ending, if nothing else. We've sidetracked a little bit, though. Let's get back on the Lictor in general. So, why are there Lictors, and why are they dumped on random planets and asked to figure out how many squishy things are on said planet? Well, the reason for that is quite simple. They're pathfinders. They have a fairly strong, although not particularly versatile, connection to the Hive fleet. If it runs into lots and lots of squishy things, it is capable of sending a rudimentary message back home and tell the Hive fleet that it might be worth stopping by for a quick brunch on the way to the Imperial Palace. Though bear in mind, the Lictors are not anywhere near as good at this as the Genestealers. The Genestealers serve kind of the same purpose, but in a very different fashion. Whilst a Lictor is sent out ahead to basically scout out whatever it might come across, Genestealers are more directed. They are usually sent towards areas where they might think that there is something rather valuable, and they would like to prepare the invasion before the main fleet arrives. A Lictor can also carry out rudimentary preparations, like for example with the Deathleaper and the poor Cardinal, but they're nowhere near as good at it. They don't have that whole infiltration and sabotage thing that the Genestealers have got going for them. They can, however, assassinate targets of value, and whilst they might not be able to throw an entire planet into chaos, most of the time anyways, by organising a major uprising from various cultists, and so on, if, however, you kill a planet's military leadership, well, the subsequent invasion is likely to be a hell of a lot easier. But where the Lictor really shines is when the rest of the Tyranids have joined in the smorgasbord. Because while it has a very limited psychic potential, enough to basically go, beep boop, humans here, come nom nom, it doesn't really have much in the way of direct communication. It can't really deliver much in the way of a proper report. It essentially has an instinct that tells it to boost its signal depending on how many dudes it finds. Whilst on a planet, however, it gets a lot more useful because, of course, it is directed then directly by the hive mind itself, which of course has access to a hell of a lot more brain power and can far more effectively pick targets of importance for the Lictor to go and snippy-snappy. And if the Lictor finds himself without any assassination duties on his plate, he can also become a bit of a forward scout, in a more literal sense. They will be pumping out a pheromone trail as they travel across the planet. the density of said trail will increase the more enemies are nearby, which means that whilst a Lictor is hunting a specific target, for example, or is just roaming the countryside looking for things to squish, it will attract nearby Tyranid swarms to it. Now, of course, if the Tyranid swarm is directed by a Hive tyrant, in all the likelihood it's got something better to do. Instead, these pheromone trails are more intended on the various splinter forces of a Tyranid invasion fleet, since of course not all of them are going to be commanded against specific targets. In fact, a considerable portion of the Hive fleet will be busy doing what Hive fleets do, scourging the entire planet free of anything that could potentially contribute biomass to the Tyranid Hive fleet. And if in the middle of their oh-so-important mission of eating all of the plant matter on the planet, they should come across a Lictor's pheromone trail that leads them to a nice little sneaky concentration of enemies, well, all the better, really. Though this method does have one weakness. On a few occasions, the Imperium have figured out how to replicate said pheromone trail, which allowed them to lead vast Tyranid swarms into less than hospitable environments. Granted, this feat of counterintelligence actually requires the capture of a Lictor, which in and of itself is, to put it mildly, rather difficult. The Lictors are very dangerous. They are not just forward scouts, they are also, as mentioned, highly proficient assassins, and they come equipped with a wide variety of biological enhancements, the most important of them being, of course, its chameleonic carapace. This is what allows it to be so goddamn sneaky, as its carapace is able to mimic the environment, and it can therefore blend in to a frightening degree. Additionally, the Lictor is capable of locking all of its muscles into virtual immobility, which when combined with its ability to blend into the background can make it very difficult to spot, even if it is standing, relatively speaking, out in the open. And a Lictor can maintain this stance of virtual complete immobility for, well, pretty much as long as it wants to, really. It's not smart enough to get bored. It's not smart enough to get impatient. It'll just stand there forever and ever until its instincts kick in and take control over its actions once again. And when it does take action, it is lightning swift. It has been said that the Lictor is capable of picking out a single Imperial Guardsman from a whole platoon without anybody being able to notice, just grabbing the poor unfortunate little sod off the ground, finishing him off, and going back to being completely immobile again. It's actions like that has earned it the nickname Spook amongst those unfortunate enough to fight it. And obviously, of course, the Lictor comes equipped with a variety of murderous implements, claws and stabby things, and of course its characteristic giant mantis-like arms. But second in importance only to the chameleonic carapace is perhaps one of its most feared weapons, the feeder maw. A bunch of highly muscular tentacles tipped with extraordinarily sharp bone pointers driven home by a considerable amount of muscle. They are easily capable of punching through the skulls of most living organisms. And this is where the horrible part begins. You see, the Lictor is capable of eating a target being's brain and disseminating the information stored inside of said brain, in a manner not entirely dissimilar to how certain chapters of Space Marines are capable of devouring an enemy's flesh and gaining certain insights into their nature, their habits, and their immediate knowledge. The Lictor, however, has access to even more than that. Somehow it is capable of understanding enough of the target's biological structure, in all due likelihood through good old-fashioned trial, error, and experimentation, to siphon fairly important pieces of information directly from the target's brain structure, its chemistry, etc. Now, we're not talking about any ability to quote-unquote read minds here, but it will be able to disseminate surface-level information. For example, when you're nearby somebody that's really important, you will react on a psychic level, e.g., your brain is going to be reacting by secreting certain chemicals, so on and so on, making you feel nervous, awe, reverence, all of these emotions. Somehow, the Lictor has figured out a way to actually taste these things and combined that data with certain, I assume, visual data stored in the brain. In other words, it is able to figure out, okay, so this person must be really, really important, because this picture is associated with the feeling of awe, so on and so on. I couldn't even begin to explain how that functions, but apparently the Tyranids have figured out a way, and considering the shit they're capable of pulling off with biological engineering, I'm not even really surprised, honestly. And finally, let's touch upon how one might actually deal with a Lictor, were one to be a loyal son of the Imperium. Well, think of it like an uber special super sniper, essentially. It's very stealthy, you're unlikely to be able to spot it before it's way too fucking late, and if it does get to you, you don't have much of a chance. The damn thing is bigger than a space marine, and moves at the speed of fuck you, so yeah, you probably don't want to deal with it in close quarters combat. If you have a Space Marine, then step 1 should of course be to throw the Space Marine at it. I'd give an average trooper about a, 10-20% chance of taking down a Lictor. It's better than a guardsman, or hell, a platoon of guardsmen, for that sake, so, might as well try. If you've got a couple of Space Marines, they've got a decent chance. 2 or 3 Assault Marines, yeah, you've got a better than even chance of killing a Lictor with that. Assuming, of course, they can actually find the damn thing, which, well, depending on the chapter, might be either pretty damn certain or utterly fucking pointless. If you are not lucky enough to have 2 or 3 Adeptus Astartes just kinda hanging around, your best bet would be Saturation Bombardment. Figure out the rough area you think the Lictor might be in, then bombard that area, and any area within 20 kilometers of it, with every single heavy artillery piece you can possibly get your hands on. And you've got a decent chance of getting it in that, assuming of course you guessed the correct area, which, well, now we get back to the problem of actually locating the damn thing. The best way, if you've got enough manpower, would be to send a lot of Imperial Guardsmen in single line, moving through the area with Vox speeds. When one of them disappears, simply bomb that area. If it's a silly Lictor, it'll remain in place out of fear of being spotted. If you choose this approach, however, you better make damn sure you get it on the first try, because it's unlikely to make the same mistake twice. And of course, it is very important to remember that should the Lictor choose to make its hidey hole in an area filled with civilians, like, for example, a major civilian hab block, for example, don't linger upon the downsides of bombing the shit out of the hab block. Linger on the upsides. Lots of falling debris, lots of difficult terrain that even the Lictor's going to have a hard time navigating, etc. Because, at the end of the day, the Emperor will know his own, and he'll make sure that their sacrifice will be fully valued in the afterlife. Now, of course, if you do not have access to vast quantities of heavy artillery, use anything else that goes bang. Light artillery, like mortars, for example, tank shells might work. Air bombardments would be fantastic, even better if they've got napalm rounds, since Lictors are not particularly fond of extreme heat. And if you're particularly desperate, whilst it's not recommended, you could simply just gather every single heavy bolter in the platoon, point them in the rough area of where you think the Lictor might be, and hose the entire goddamn area down. The problem is that Lictors are really, really fucking big, really, really fucking tough, and they can probably eat a fair few heavy bolter rounds, so, you best make sure you have enough heavy bolters pointing in its general direction before you start firing. Because if you only injure it, well, it's almost certainly going to take umbrage to the fact that you're shooting at it. Oh, and don't even bother hosing the area down with lasguns. In all due likelihood, it won't even bother moving under that kind of barrage. It'll just stand there, vibrating softly as it laughs to itself. In all due reality, if you want to have any real chance of killing a Lictor without basically throwing the RNG dice and hoping to God that you hit it with a stray shell, you're going to need specialists. Ideally speaking, you want the proper specialists. We're talking Deathwatch Astartes here. They are one of very, very few forces in the galaxy that are specially equipped to deal with specific Xenos threats, the Lictor being one of them. they've got access to the weapons, ammunition, and armor that can actually deal with a Lictor, and far more importantly, they've got access to the kind of sensing equipment that can actually detect a Lictor with any degree of certainty. But, of course, Natürlichen, Deathwatch Astartes are rare as fuck. You are, in fact, far more likely to simply get lucky and hit it with an artillery shell than you are to actually have a squad of Deathwatch at your disposal. So, you know, artillery is still probably your best bet in almost all circumstances. Alternatively, you might have a decent chance if you've got access to Imperial Guard regiments that are specialized at operating in these specific circumstances, e.g., the kind of planet you are on. If you find your unhappy ass operating on some form of jungle death world, for example, a regiment of Catagens will have a decent-ish, by Imperial Guard standards, chance of flushing out the damn thing, simply because they know the environment almost as well as it is going to know the environment. I'd still put their chances of actually killing the damn thing somewhere south of 10 to 20%, but on the bright side, they do have a reasonable chance of figuring out roughly where the thing might be, and then you can continue with Plan B. B obviously standing for bombardment in this case. And finally, the one and only reliable stratagem, kind of, to dealing with a Lictor, known only to the operatives of the Death Guard. It is a most sneaky and ingenious tactic known simply as bait. Remember, the Lictor is primarily an assassin. Take something very, very valuable, preferably something also rather squishy to attract the Lictor, place it in a not too obvious location because the Lictor isn't a complete idiot, and then wait. In all due likelihood, the life of the bait is forfeit, but details. Mind you, that this stratagem only really works if the bait is not aware of the fact that he is actually bait. Because remember, the Lictor's a sneaky little fucker. If he notices that his target is acting strangely, he might make the leap of logic that, this is a bit odd. My primary target is wandering around in the open in the middle of a goddamn rose garden with a plaque on his back saying, "Please, please, oh god, please eat me, dear Mr. Lictor-chan." Maybe, just maybe, this is bait. And perhaps, just perhaps, I should wander off into the shadows and see if I can't find a big burly Astartes in black power armor with a bolt gun hiding somewhere. And with that, I will finish up this video on the Tyranid Lictor. As always, I have been Arch, thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Especially as we're probably going to have to cover the Deathwatch relatively soon now, because, well, we did talk a little bit about them here, and maybe everybody doesn't know what precisely they actually are. Anyways, until then, have a good day.